A mechanic, huh? You think you can fix this? Tessa Bennett's voice cut through the room, dripping with condescension. The luxury electric car's engine sat there, ruined by a flood, its sleek lines now a testament to failure. Her sharp, calculating gaze locked on Eli Jackson, who had been mopping the floors just a few minutes ago, his uniform smelling faintly of grease. He wasn't even supposed to be in this room. A mechanic, a backwater mechanic, was hardly the person to save her company's most expensive project. "Fix this flooded engine, and I'll marry you," Tessa sneered, her laughter echoing off the boardroom walls as her colleagues joined in. The challenge was more than a joke. It was a dismissal, a moment of total humiliation. But something flickered in Eli's eyes. They had no idea what he could do. If you're hooked in and you're ready to enjoy this story, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because tomorrow I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now let us begin. The tension hung thick in the air, the kind that makes your heart race. They thought he didn't belong, thought he was just another invisible worker. But Eli was more than just a janitor in a grease-stained jumpsuit. He was a man with a hidden talent, an intellect passed down from his grandfather that had never been recognized. A fire stirred inside him, one he hadn't felt in years. And in that instant, Eli made a decision. He'd show them all. "I'll fix it," he said, his voice steady and unshaken. The room went quiet. Disbelief rippled through the faces of the engineers, the executives, even Tessa. It was more than a challenge now, it was a war of pride. A fight to prove that brilliance doesn't just come from degrees and designer suits. It wasn't always like this for Eli. Far from the sleek conference rooms and luxury car prototypes, Eli grew up in a world where grease-stained hands and old engines were a way of life. Raised by his grandfather, a legendary mechanic from the working-class streets of Detroit, Eli spent countless hours in their small garage, learning the art of fixing engines before he even knew how to drive. His grandfather had taught him to see the inner workings of machinery, to understand its soul the way others saw the world through their textbooks. But when Eli came to the city for a better life, his hands, calloused from years of hard work, weren't seen as the mark of a craftsman. They were just the hands of a man who didn't belong. Eli Thompson wasn't supposed to be anybody. He grew up in a Detroit neighborhood where sirens were the lullabies and broken dreams lined the streets like autumn leaves. His grandfather, Pop, ran a garage that smelled of motor oil and redemption. While other kids played video games, Eli spent summers under car hoods, Pop's calloused hands guiding his smaller ones. "Engine's got a heart, boy," Pop would say, tapping a wrench against a cylinder block. "You gotta listen to what it's telling you." By 15, Eli could diagnose a misfiring engine by sound alone. By 17, he'd rebuilt a '67 Mustang from scrap. But then Pop died, the garage closed, and Eli found himself pushing a mop at Sterling Motors, invisible, just like everyone assumed he'd always be. Tessa Morgan never knew that kind of hunger. Her childhood was country clubs and private tutors, summers in the Hamptons. She'd never felt grease under her fingernails or the satisfaction of bringing something broken back to life. Late one Tuesday night, Eli found blueprints left on the boardroom table. The flooded prototype. His hands trembled as he studied the diagrams, and something clicked, a pattern the engineers had missed, buried in the complexity they'd created. "They're overthinking it," he realized. "It's not a computer problem. It's mechanical." Down the hall, Tessa's team worked past midnight, desperation thick as smoke. Another failure. Another expensive recalibration. And in that quiet moment, Eli made a decision that would change everything. The answer had been hiding in plain sight. Imperial and metric. Software speaking one language, hardware answering in another. The engineers had been chasing ghosts in the code while the real problem was as old as Pop's garage, a fundamental miscommunication between man and machine. Eli's heart hammered. This is it. This is what Pop taught me. Listen to what the engine's telling you. Thursday morning, he did something that could get him fired. He walked into that sterile engineering bay with a $50 harmonic dampener in his pocket, the kind you could pick up at any AutoZone off I-94. The engineers barely noticed him, just another janitor emptying trash cans. But when Eli approached the flooded prototype and opened the hood, heads turned. "Hey, what are you?" someone started. Eli didn't answer. His hands moved with the confidence of 10,000 hours under Pop's watchful eye, recalibrating sensors, synchronizing the mismatched systems with a precision that made MIT degrees look like participation trophies. From her glass office, Tessa watched through narrowed eyes. This has to be a joke, she thought, arms crossed. The janitor? With a part that costs less than our team's lunch order? She'd bet her reputation on artificial intelligence, machine learning, innovation. Not some blue-collar kid with grease under his nails playing mechanic with her billion-dollar problem. But something in the way he moved made her stomach tighten. What if he was right? The boardroom was packed. Investors. Engineers. Cameras rolling for the quarterly livestream, because Tessa loved an audience when she won. She stood with her arms folded, a smirk playing at her lips as Eli tightened the final bolt. Let him embarrass himself, she thought. Maybe it'll teach him to stay in his lane. The lead engineer held the ignition key like it was evidence in a trial. He glanced at Tessa. She nodded, bored already. The key turned. For a split second, nothing. Then the engine caught, and that prototype roared to life with a sound that stopped every heart in the room. Not sputtering. Not choking. Purring. Like it had been born to run. The dashboard lit up green across the board. Every system synchronized. Perfect. Silence thicker than prayer. One of the engineers whispered, "Holy." Tessa's smirk died on her face. The color drained from her cheeks as the cameras kept rolling, broadcasting her shock to 50,000 viewers and counting. Comments exploded across the screen. Did the janitor just fix it? Y'all paid engineers 6 figures to get schooled by a $50 part. This is the most American underdog story I've ever seen. The investors, Vultures and Armani, turned their gaze from the engine to Eli. One of them started clapping. Then another. Then the whole room erupted, and Tessa stood there, frozen in her own humiliation, watching a janitor become a legend. Pop would have smiled. The German investors didn't waste time on pleasantries. Klaus Bergmann, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, the kind of man who'd built empires from rubble, approached Eli while the engine still hummed its victory song. He extended his hand, and when Eli shook it, Klaus held on a beat longer than necessary. "Das ist beeindruckend," Klaus said. Then in perfect English, "Impressive. Where did you study engineering?" "Pop's garage," Eli said. "Detroit." Klaus smiled like he'd just found gold in a junkyard. Within the hour, they'd pulled Tessa into the conference room, her own conference room, and the air felt thin, suffocating. "We need to discuss leadership," Klaus began, folding his hands on the table. The other investors nodded like a jury delivering a verdict. "This young man solved in hours what your team couldn't solve in months." Tessa's jaw tightened. With all due respect, one success doesn't. "One success saved this deal," another investor cut in. "We're prepared to move forward, but we want Eli Thompson leading the engineering development. Immediately." The room tilted. No. This was her company. Her vision. Her sweat and sleepless nights and Ivy League credentials that were supposed to mean something. But the investors weren't looking at her anymore. They were looking at Eli like he was the future and she was just expensive overhead. She had 2 choices: swallow her pride and admit she'd been blind, or watch everything she'd built crumble because she couldn't let go. The silence screamed. 3 weeks later, Tessa sat in a mandatory sensitivity training seminar, her, a CEO with an MBA from Wharton, listening to a consultant explain the dangers of unconscious bias. The irony tasted like ashes. The board had been ruthless. Mandatory training was corporate speak for "we're watching you now." Her authority had become conditional, her decisions second-guessed. Every meeting felt like a performance review. And Eli? Eli was thriving. He'd moved from janitorial closets to the corner office on the engineering floor. Within a month, he'd streamlined 3 production lines and saved the company $2 million. Forbes called him Detroit's Renaissance man. Wired ran a feature titled The Janitor Who Humbled Silicon Valley. Tech giants started calling. Headhunters circled like hawks. But Eli stayed. Something about loyalty to the place that, despite everything, had given him a chance. Tessa watched from her shrinking kingdom as the company she'd built began to orbit around someone else's gravity. Department heads who used to seek her approval now knocked on Eli's door. The investors CC'd him on emails that used to be hers alone. She'd become middle management in her own empire. Late one Thursday, she stood outside Eli's office, holding a proposal that needed his sign-off. His sign-off. The kid who used to empty her trash now held her career in his calloused hands. She knocked. "Come in," Eli said. And Tessa stepped through the door into her new reality. 6 months transformed everything. Eli became Senior Vice President of Engineering, a title that would have been laughable a year ago. But he'd earned it in the language everyone understood: results. His hybrid engine design cut production costs by 40%. His supply chain restructuring saved Sterling Motors from bankruptcy. TechCrunch called him the blue-collar genius rewriting innovation. And Tessa? She was learning to eat humble pie, one bitter slice at a time. She found herself in Eli's office more than her own, notebook open, asking questions she never thought she'd need answered by someone without a degree. "The autonomous braking system keeps glitching," she said one afternoon, her voice smaller than it used to be. "Our software team can't figure it out." Eli leaned back, that same calm he'd had under car hoods with Pop. "They're thinking like programmers. But cars aren't just code, they're physics, metal, momentum. You gotta respect what the machine can actually do, not just what you want it to do." It was the kind of wisdom MIT never taught. He walked her through the solution, patient as a saint, never once throwing her words back in her face. Never mentioning that boardroom, that smirk, that dismissal. Some nights, Tessa wondered if she'd have been that gracious. The company flourished. Stock prices soared. And slowly, impossibly, something unexpected began to grow between the CEO who'd lost everything and the janitor who'd saved it all. Respect. The annual shareholders' meeting packed the Detroit Convention Center. 2,000 people, cameras from every major network, the kind of audience that made or broke legacies. Tessa stood at the podium, looking out at a sea of faces that used to hang on her every word. But today wasn't about her. 18 months ago, she began, her voice steady but humbled, "I nearly destroyed this company. Not through malice, but through arrogance. Through the belief that credentials mattered more than capability. That titles meant more than talent." The room went silent. "I overlooked a janitor named Eli Thompson because I couldn't see past my own privilege. And he saved us anyway." She turned, gesturing to Eli in the front row. He looked uncomfortable in his suit, still more at home in work boots than boardrooms. "Sterling Motors is now operating in 43 countries. Our luxury electric line has a 2-year waiting list. We hold 17 patents on revolutionary engine technology. And every single breakthrough traces back to one man who learned mechanics in his grandfather's garage." The applause started small, then built like thunder. MIT called him for guest lectures. Stanford offered him an honorary doctorate. Time magazine featured him in the 100 most influential people in technology. But the moment that mattered most came backstage, when Tessa found Eli alone, staring at Pop's old wrench he kept in his pocket. "You did it," she said softly. "Pop would be so proud." Eli looked up, eyes glistening. "We did it." 2 years later, Eli stood in his own workshop, not some sterile corporate lab, but a real garage that smelled like motor oil and possibility, just like Pop's. Sterling Motors had built it for him on campus, understanding that genius needs room to breathe. The door opened. Tessa, carrying 2 coffees, no assistant, no entourage. "Thought you could use this," she said, handing him a cup. He smiled. "You're getting good at the coffee runs." "Don't push it, Thompson." But she was smiling too. The kind of smile that comes from surviving your own destruction and finding something better on the other side. They'd become an unlikely force, her vision, his execution. Her polish, his grit. The Ivy League CEO and the Detroit mechanic, building something neither could have created alone. "What are you working on?" she asked, leaning against the workbench. Eli wiped his hands on a rag. "Thinking about sustainable engines for developing countries. Something cheap, reliable. The kind of thing that gives people a shot." "Just like Pop gave me," he didn't say. But she heard it anyway. "When do we start?" Tessa asked. Outside, the sun set over Detroit, painting the sky in redemption colors, gold and crimson and hope. Inside that garage, 2 people who'd been enemies were building a future where talent mattered more than pedigree, where second chances were sacred, and where a mechanic's hands could change the world. Sometimes, God writes the best stories in motor oil and humility.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as interesting and even more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out.